Hours later, the innkeeper stood in the doorway of the waystone and let his eyes relax to the darkness. Footprints of lamplight from the inn's windows fell across the dirt road and the doors of the smithy across the way. It was not a large road or well-traveled. It didn't seem to lead anywhere, as some roads do. The innkeeper drew a deep breath of autumn air and looked around restlessly, as if waiting for something to happen. He called himself Kote. He had chosen the name carefully when he came to this place. He had taken a new name for most of the usual reasons, and for a few unusual ones as well, not the least of which was the fact that names were important to him. Looking up, he saw 1,000 stars glittering in the deep velvet of a night with no moon. He knew them all, their stories and their names. He knew them in a familiar way, the way he knew his own hands. Looking down, Kote sighed without knowing it and went back inside. He locked the door and shuttered the wide windows of the inn, as if to distance himself from the stars and all their varied names. He swept the floor, methodically, catching all the corners. He washed the tables and the bar, moving with a patient efficiency. At the end of an hour's work, the water in his bucket was still clean enough for a lady to wash her hands in. Finally, he pulled a stool behind the bar and began to polish the vast array of bottles nestled between the two huge barrels. He wasn't nearly as crisp and efficient about this chore as he had been with the others, and it soon became obvious the polishing was only an excuse to touch and hold. He even hummed a little, although he did not realize it, and would have stopped himself if he had known. As he turned the bottles in his long, graceful hands, the familiar motion eased a few tired lines from his face, making him seem younger, certainly not yet 30, not even near 30, young for an innkeeper, young for a man with so many tired lines remaining on his face. Kote came to the top of the stairs and opened the door. His room was austere, almost monkish. There was a black stone fireplace in the center of the room, a pair of chairs, and a small desk. The only other furniture was a narrow bed with a large, dark chest at its foot. Nothing decorated the walls or covered the wooden floor. There were footsteps in the hall, and a young man stepped into the room carrying a bowl of stew that steamed and smelled of pepper. He was dark and charming, with a quick smile and cunning eyes. "You haven't been this late in weeks," he said as he handed over the bowl. "There must have been good stories tonight, Reshi." Reshi was another of the innkeeper's names, a nickname almost. The sound of it tugged one corner of his mouth into a wry smile as he sank into the deep chair in front of the fire. "So, what did you learn today, Bast?" "Today, master? I learned why great lovers have better eyesight than great scholars." "And why is that, Bast?" Kote asked, amusement touching the edges of his voice. Bast closed the door and returned to sit in the second chair, turning it to face his teacher and the fire. He moved with a strange delicacy and grace, as if he were close to dancing. "Well, Rishi, all the rich books are found inside where the light is bad, but lovely girls tend to be out in the sunshine, and therefore much easier to study without risk of injuring one's eyes." Kote nodded. "But an exceptionally clever student could take a book outside, thus bettering himself without fear of lessening his much-loved faculty of sight." "I thought the same thing, Reshi, being of course an exceptionally clever student." "Of course." "But when I found a place in the sun where I could read, a beautiful girl came along and kept me from doing anything of the sort." Bast finished with a flourish. Kote sighed. "Am I correct in assuming you didn't manage to read any of Celum Tinture today?" Bast managed to look somewhat ashamed. Looking into the fire, Kote tried to assume a stern face and failed. "Ah, Bast, I hope she was lovely as a warm wind in the shade. I'm a bad teacher to say it, but I'm glad. I don't feel up to a long bout of lessons right now." There was a moment of silence. Carter was attacked by a skraeling tonight. Bast's easy smile fell away like a cracked mask, leaving his face stricken and pale. "The skrael?" He came halfway to his feet as if he would bolt from the room, then gave an embarrassed frown and forced himself back down into his chair. "How'd you know? Who found his body?" "He's still alive, Bast. He brought it back. There was only one." "There's no such thing as one skraeling," Bast said flatly. "You know that." "I know," Kote said. "The fact remains there was only one." "And he killed it?" Bast said. "It couldn't have been a skraeling. Maybe—" "Bast, it was one of the skrael. I saw it." Kote gave him a serious look. "He was lucky, that's all. Even so, he was badly hurt. 48 stitches. I used up nearly all my gut. Kote picked up his bowl of stew.
If anyone asks, tell them my grandfather was a caravan guard who taught me how to clean and stitch a wound. They were too shocked to ask about it tonight, but tomorrow some of them might get curious. I don't want that.
He blew into his bowl, raising a cloud of steam around his face. What did you do with the body?
I didn't do anything with it, Kote said pointedly. I am just an innkeeper. This sort of thing is quite beyond me.
Reshi, you can't just let them muddle through this on their own.
Kote sighed. They took it to the priest. He did all the right things for all the wrong reasons.
Bast opened his mouth, but Kote continued before he could say anything.
Yes, I made sure the pit was deep enough. Yes, I made sure there was rowan wood in the fire. Yes, I made sure it burned long and hot before they buried it. And yes, I made sure that no one kept a piece of it as a souvenir.
He scowled, his eyebrows drawing together.
I'm not an idiot, you know.
Bast visibly relaxed, settling back into his chair. I know you're not, Reshi, but I wouldn't trust half these people to piss leeward without help. He looked thoughtful for a moment. I can't imagine why there was only one.
Maybe they died coming over the mountains,
Kote suggested.
All but this one.
It's possible, Bast admitted reluctantly.
Maybe it was that storm from a couple days back,
Kote pointed out.
A real wagon tipper, as we used to say back in the troop. All the wind and rain might have scattered one loose from the pack.
I like your first idea better, Reshi, Bast said uncomfortably. 3 or 4 Skrael would go through this town like
a hot knife through butter?
More like several hot knives through several dozen farmers, Bast said dryly. These people can't defend themselves. I bet there aren't 6 swords in this whole town. Not that swords would do much good against the Skrael.
There was a long moment of thoughtful silence. After a moment, Bast began to fidget.
Any news?
Kote shook his head. They didn't get to the news tonight. Carter disrupted things while they were still telling stories. That's something, I suppose. They'll be back tomorrow night. It'll give me something to do.
Kote poked his spoon idly into the stew.
I should have bought the Skrael from Carter, he mused. He could have used the money for a new horse. People would have come from all over to see it. We could have had some business for a change.
Bast gave him a speechless, horrified look. Kote made a pacifying gesture with the hand that held the spoon.
I'm joking, Bast. He gave a weak smile. Still, it would have been nice.
No, Reshi, it most certainly would not have been nice, Bast said emphatically. People would have come from all over to see it, he repeated derisively. Indeed.
The business would have been nice,
Kote clarified.
Busyness would be nice.
He jabbed his spoon into the stew again.
Anything would be nice.
They sat for a long moment, Kote scowling down into the bowl of stew in his hands, his eyes far away.
It must be awful for you here, Bast,
he said at last.
You must be numb with boredom.
Bast shrugged. There are a few young wives in town, a scattering of daughters. He grinned like a child. I tend to make my own fun.
That's good, Bast.
There was another silence. Kote took another spoonful, chewed, swallowed.
They thought it was a demon, you know.
Bast shrugged. It might as well be, Reshi. It's possibly the best thing for them to think.
I know. I encouraged them, in fact. But you know what that means.
He met Bast's eyes.
The blacksmith is going to be doing a brisk business in the next couple days.
Bast's expression went carefully blank.
Ew.
Kote nodded.
I won't blame you if you want to leave, Bast. You have better places to be than this.
Bast's expression was shocked. I couldn't leave, Reshi. He opened and closed his mouth a few times, at a loss for words. Who else would teach me? Kote grinned, and for a moment his face showed how truly young he was. Behind the wary lines and the placid innkeeper's expression, he looked no older than his dark-haired companion.
Who indeed?
He gestured toward the door with his spoon.
Go do your reading then, or bother someone's daughter. I'm sure you have better things to do than watch me eat.
Actually,
Begone, demon!
Kote said, switching to a thickly accented Temic through half a mouthful of stew.
Tehus antausa eha!
Bast burst into startled laughter and made an obscene gesture with one hand. Kote swallowed and changed languages.
Eroi te denaleon!
Oh, come now, Bast reproached, his smile falling away. That's just insulting.
By earth and stone, I abjure you.
Kote dipped his fingers into the cup by his side and flicked droplets casually in Bast's direction.
Glamour, be banished!
With cider? Bast managed to look amused and annoyed at the same time as he daubed a bead of liquid from the front of his shirt. This better not stain. Kote took another bite of his dinner.
Go soak it. If the situation becomes desperate, I recommend you avail yourself of the numerous solvent formulae extant in Celum Tinture. Chapter 13, I believe.
Fine. Bast stood and walked to the door, stepping with his strange casual grace. Call if you need anything. He closed the door behind himself. Kote ate slowly, mopping up the last of the stew with a piece of bread. He looked out the window as he ate, or tried to, as the lamplight turned its surface mirror-like against the dark behind it. His eyes wandered the room restlessly. The fireplace was made of the same black rock as the one downstairs. It stood in the center of the room, a minor feat of engineering of which Kote was rather proud. The bed was small, a little more than a cot, and if you were to touch it, you would find this mattress almost non-existent. A skilled observer might notice there was something his gaze avoided, the same way you avoid meeting the eye of an old lover at a formal dinner, or that of an old enemy sitting across the room in a crowded alehouse late at night. Kote tried to relax, failed, fidgeted, sighed, shifted in his seat, and without willing it, his eyes fell on the chest at the foot of the bed. It was made of roa, a rare heavy wood, dark as coal and smooth as polished glass. Prized by perfumers and alchemists, a piece the size of your thumb was easily worth gold. To have a chest made of it went far beyond extravagance. The chest was sealed 3 times. It had a lock of iron, a lock of copper, and a lock that could not be seen. Tonight the wood filled the room with almost imperceptible aroma of citrus and quenching iron. When Kote's eyes fell on the chest, they did not dart quickly away. They did not slide slyly to the side as if he would pretend it wasn't there at all. But in a moment of looking, his face regained all the lines the simple pleasures of the day had slowly smoothed away. The comfort of his bottles and books was erased in a second, leaving nothing behind his eyes but emptiness and ache. For a moment, fierce longing and regret warred across his face. Then they were gone, replaced by the weary face of an innkeeper, a man who called himself Kote. He sighed again, without knowing it, and pushed himself to his feet. It was a long time before he walked past the chest to bed. Once in bed, it was a long time before he slept.